Okay, we're going to move on to the next question, which is related to gated communities. The question states we want to encourage permeability, create inclusive places and preserve the historic character of existing streets and spaces. Do you agree that gating public streets or permitted gated communities should generally be resisted? And are there any circumstances where gated communities should be allowed? If so, what criteria should be applied to these schemes? Any views on that, please?
Simon Burke at Knightsbridge Association. I think a great deal of care is needed with a policy like this in terms of how it's defined and what it says and doesn't say. Clearly, taking over an entire length of a road for a private community is something that should only be done as a last resort if it's a public road. But that is absolutely one end of a spectrum. Leading to that, you can have a whole lot of things in terms of shared space and things like that. Or schemes like that, which might involve substantially reducing traffic volumes. You wouldn't want. We strongly believe you do not want to deter those sort of schemes by the wording you might apply to this sort of policy. Saying you don't want gated schemes or in general gated schemes, which enclose, say, 100 yards of a public highway for a private group. I think most people would agree that that's not a good thing, but don't word it so it stops other sensible things happening.
Thank you. Up front.
John Samet again. I strongly support this policy. I think it was a good decision the council made when they discussed this. I think the muses and small streets are there for everybody. And I don't agree with gated communities. I know they may take over some of the cost of the upkeep of the street or lighting, or they may pass it on to pay the council. But I think they should. But another important factor is I think I have a muse where once you've got a gated street, dead-end street muse, you're still entitled to, res park permits, not limited, not charged. So you can park out in the streets around, and in theory you could let out your space within your muse for commuter parking or any parking. And I think they want the best of both worlds, these people, and I can't really see very few occasions. And if they do bring up reasons of antisocial behaviour, I think all other avenues should be addressed to tackle those problems. And if any permission was going to be given, it's a temporary one, but even that they'll probably then try and make it long term. So I think it's a good policy to protect our muses, and the larger gated communities are definitely against those where through traffic can't go through.
The current policy, the exception to the policy, is where antisocial behaviour or crime is a problem, and all other avenues have been explored. And I took a decision recently, which I think affected Church Street ward. Barbara's at the back, perhaps she'll confirm that, where we did in fact introduce some gating because it wasn't really a muse, it was actually just an alleyway which was causing particular problems.
I think the muses are dead ends one argument, but even through muses want to be gated, and they're often a release route for when there's disruptions in the normal traffic flow. I think to stop that thing for emergency vehicles. So I fully support the policy.
Thank you, gentleman here.
Victoria Interchange Group, we support it too. I'm not sure whether this question is aimed at gating of purely residential areas or gating more generally. We would invite the Council in its policy development to look very much more carefully at the question of public realm developments and agreements in relation not merely to residential areas where gating is plainly a confession of failure in social policy, but also at the effect on commercial developments for retail and offices. They can inadvertently slip through and become quite exclusionary, not merely, as Mrs. Kingman was explaining earlier, in relation to them being unpleasant for people in her position and by reason of the poor design, but in terms of the content. For example, a local one that bans wheeled transport has a fleet of private security guards. They have stopped 3-year-olds with scooters because those are wheeled vehicles which they say shouldn't be allowed on the development. It makes it a little difficult to get across that supposedly pedestrian permeable area from where you live to a park.
Yeah.
it's something that plainly wasn't foreseen when it was drafted and agreed, and it's now unfortunately set in at the stone of a Section 106 agreement. More care does need to be taken, we would suggest. Okay, if there are no more comments on that, can I thank you for your contributions against those 7 questions, and propose that we now take a 10-minute break. There are some refreshments at the back of the room, and as Tom said, there are toilets on this side of the core and the other side of the core, and we shall reconvene at 7:05. Thank you.